Tonight, impending food crisis at colleges of education force government into action, with Education Minister calling a hurriedly arranged press conference to declare that the president will keep his campaign promises to teacher trainees and to the colleges.
President of the Republic, the Finance Minister, has worked hard to ensure that various promises made to colleges of education are carried through, has once again delivered on their promise.
Tonight we'll hear from the principals who had served notice they will end free feeding for students and trainee teachers who are still owed months of unpaid allowances as government releases more than 67 million cedis in emergency funding.
This is Top Story with Evans Mensah.
And Top Story is always brought to you by Vodafone and Prime Insurance. Now, colleges of education across the country have in the last few weeks been tumbling towards a full-blown crisis, which came to a head this week when principals served notice they will have to stop feeding trainee teachers altogether if government continued withholding promised funding. Now, here's the president of the National Conference of Principals of Colleges of Education, Dr. Emmanuel Nyamiche.
For 6.5 months now, we haven't received any money to be paid to our suppliers in respect of food items that they have supplied to the colleges of education. So we have been in touch with the authorities, and assurances have been given, and we have managed to weather the storm up to this point. But we got to a stage where our suppliers are insisting that not until we pay them what we owe them, they are not in a position to supply any food items to us. Quite a number of our students are not in a position to feed themselves.
Well, the teacher trainees themselves were alarmed that they were going to be left to feed themselves, especially when government had failed to pay their training allowances. This is Jonathan Junu. He represents the National the Trainee Teachers Association.
Where would the student get the money from if you are asking them to feed themselves? If you are giving them 2 meals, breakfast, lunch, where would they get the money from to get supper? If you are giving them only lunch, where would they get the money from to get breakfast and supper? And then finally, you asking them to feed themselves for the rest of the time. Where would they get the money from? The situation is all about the allowance. You know, the feeding component comes with the allowance. So allowances are not paid. Feeding component is not paid. The students equally do not have the money.
So that is the crisis that tonight has prompted a reaction from the government. It's the media challenge was about feeding the students, and the principals had said that after May 8th, they will stop providing free feeding, free food for the students altogether. That is the crisis that had triggered a reaction tonight. But that is just one of many issues that the colleges of education had to deal with this year. Before this, both teachers and non-teaching staff of the colleges had at various times this year withdrawn their services over poor conditions of service. The students themselves have been agitating, as you heard there, about government's failure to pay several months' arrears of trainee allowances, which was a key campaign promise of the MPP government. And the lack of infrastructure had also forced the Education Ministry to enforce a double-track system. Well, today, the Education Minister, Yao Osei-Duchum, had been forced to address these concerns. He says monies have now been released, and the president is reassuring that he will keep his promises.
I'm very happy today to inform you that government has released 67,942,652 cedis to colleges of education. I know you may have read the media reports. There were many calls on us to respond to concerns of Prinkoff, and we wanted to take advantage of your presence here to let the country know that the President of the Republic, the Finance Minister, and all those who have worked hard to ensure that various promises made to colleges of education are carried through has once again delivered on their promise. And that is why this amount has been released to colleges of education.
And that's all there was at this press conference. Brief, a few under 1 minute statement made by the Education Minister, Yausa Duchum. Let's bring in now the national president of the Conference of Principals of Colleges of Education. They issued a statement this week that appears now to have triggered this intervention by the government. Joins me on the telephone line right now, Dr. Emmanuel Nyamiche. Doc, thank you for your time. You're on Top Story.
The pleasure is mine.
You heard the minister there. Your reaction?
Yeah, we're very grateful. The swift response, we couldn't have asked for less, and we very grateful to the government, His Excellency the President, the Minister of Education, Director General, GTEC, Finance Minister, and all those who have made it possible for this to happen.
67 million. Do you estimate that would fix the problem with the funding you had raised about concerning the feeding?
We are yet to get to the details of what it entails.
Should I take it then that the monies have not reflected yet in your accounts?
Oh, no, but once the minister has mentioned it publicly, I know it's going to come.
I asked that because in your earlier interaction with us, you noted that you've received assurances in the past that had not necessarily been fulfilled.
Yeah, but if you realize the minister was specific on the figures involved, in as far as the amount released is concerned.
In your statement, you touched on a plea to also increase how much you are paying for food per trainee.
That's true, but the immediate concern was the feeding fees arrears. Once we have got that, then we can begin to talk about a review in the feeding fee per day per student. So
this will, if once it reflects in your accounts, this will take care of the entire semester, or what normally once the release comes, it takes care of the year or a term?
No, the semester.
The semester.
We're still in the first semester, the concluding part of the first semester, and then we would go into the second semester, and then we will take it up from there.
So for students who will be listening, you say once this reflects, this 8th of May schedule that you've given will not apply anymore because you now have enough to take care of them for both breakfast, lunch, and supper.
It would be a non-start.
How many months of arrears are you talking about here?
We're talking about 6 months.
And these suppliers have kept faith with you all throughout that time?
Yes, because we've worked with them for a couple of years now. And so they do understand that anytime we get money, we would make good our indebtedness to them.
I bet you can't wait to settle them.
we cannot. We would do that as soon as it comes so that they would feel confident enough to keep supplying us with food items.
Stay with me because I want to get some clarity on when the monies, you can expect the monies to reflect in your account so you can make those payments and avoid the scenario you had articulated in your press release. Thankfully, the spokesperson for the Education Minister, the ministry, Mr. Kwating, joins us on the telephone line as well. Mr. Kwating, I'm grateful for your time here on Top Story.
Yeah, thank you, Evans, and a very good evening to you.
I mean, when do you reckon the 67 million will hit accounts so the principals can begin to make payments?
Okay, I mean, per the minister's statement today, clearly he spoke about the release of the funds. And so far as I'm concerned, and the ministry is concerned, what we know is that the funds has been released. And of course, if you look at the process of funds being released, definitely the Ministry of Finance will have to okay it. Then the release or the payment is done mostly by controller. And that is the process of the release. And it's expected that right after the release, the controllers of the account or the owners of the account, usually, if it has reflected, have to acknowledge the reflection. But as of now, what I know is that the release has been made, a statement has been made to that officially and in the public. And then I'm very hopeful that in terms of the reflection, we should see it, or we should have a confirmation from our friends from the colleges of education.
I mean, from the clarity we heard, this has been outstanding for 6 months. What happened?
Yes, obviously, we acknowledge that there has been some arrears that government ought to pay. And of course, I mean, if you look at the arrears, clearly there are processes when it comes to the payment of money. So throughout all these months, the processes, of course, we do admit that indeed there has been some delays. But then the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Finance were really working hard to make sure that the disbursement is gone. And so, yes, the delay is admitted, and indeed, we are not comfortable with that. But for us, I think what is most important is the swift response that the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Finance has put into this to make sure that at the end of the day, those arrears have been released. And what it translates into is that we are not going to have a situation where our colleges of education, our students are not going to be fed. I think all in all, we feel that a response button has been provoked, and it was swift, it was rapid, and for us, that is the most important thing.
You use the word swift. I take it then that is in response directly to the roadmap that said after 8th of May, the students will have to feed themselves. That is what had triggered this response you call swift.
Yes, it's swift in a context that, obviously, if you look at payment processes, it is not an event. Obviously, it's a process. And it is not possible for you to initiate a payment process from the Ministry of Finance right to controller for all this process to happen in a day. What it means is that probably the process had already started. And then when there are concerns, obviously you may have to speed the process. And that is what I mean by that swift response, that the process was sped, and at the end of the day, we are seeing some outcomes which at the end of the day benefits all of us and seeks to cure a certain challenge that could visit us if probably a proactive measure or a swift response was not meted out. And so that is what I mean by a swift response. It doesn't mean that probably, Premkov came out with a statement and all of a sudden it shook the whole foundation of the ministry and monies were released. No. It is not possible to initiate a process of disbursement from the Ministry of Finance within a day. It takes a process. It's not an event. But of course, within these last days, the process has been very swift. There has been some level of alacrity attached to it. There is speed. And that has brought out this result.
You can disagree that this is pretty much an indictment on the government for it to be this swift reaction just because of the impending food crisis, which the principals have alerted us to, which means this could have been averted 6 months ago.
Evans, the point is that I am not sure. The other suggestion too is that you saw the letter that came out, and this whole thing became topical today. Are we suggesting that the processes were started today, and it took today for all the processes to end, for the release or the payment to be made? Clearly, no. Obviously, the process was already in the pipeline. And of course, for me, even if you ask me, regardless of the swiftness and the rapidness and the alacrity attached to this, I still believe that whichever way the payment was going to be made, and so somehow you have other people also arguing that it's purely coincidental that the calls were made by Prinkoff, and of course the money still were released. But I think for us the most important thing is that whichever way leadership responded to a call, and that call was for the disbursement of a month of some funds. Obviously, the processes leading to the disbursement of these funds was already in the pipeline or had already started. And as soon as there is a concern, what you do to demonstrate leadership is to move in with that sense of urgency and make sure that whatever funds that is outstanding or whatever arrears that is outstanding is released. And that is what the Minister for Education did. I don't think it is an issue of indictment. What I believe is that it is more of listening to the concerns that has been raised by stakeholders within the education sector. And at the end of the day, we are seeking to cure a problem that probably we could envisage in the long run.
So the 67 million, how many months arrears will this cover?
Okay, so if we look at it in actual terms, the entire academic year were to pay an amount of 117,942,652. Last year, December, an amount of 50 million Ghana cedis was made. That is in respect of the 2020-2021 academic year. So the balance left, or the arrears, was 67,942,652. That is what has been released today. So it settles the arrears for the 2020-2021 academic year.
The entire 6 months will be covered by this?
It's for the full 2020-2021 academic year, which includes that 6 months, yes, arrears that we have.
What about 2021-2022?
Yes, so if you look at it now, you have about 4 different cohorts in school now. Because you have those in first year, second year, third year, fourth year. Roughly, you are looking at an amount of over 300 million Ghana cedis. GTEC, through the Ministry of Education, has made a request to the Finance Ministry. And I am very much aware that the process is far advanced, and I'm very sure that the release will also follow very soon. So that is the balance due, but we have cleared the arrears that was existing.
Okay, so what is outstanding is the remainder of this year?
Yes, that is the balance due. I don't think we can call it outstanding. If you call it outstanding, it will be understood as an arrears.
Okay.
But I mean, if you look at the 2021-22 academic year, it's still ongoing, and so it's balance due, which the processes have begun for the payment, because the requests have been made from our end through the Ministry of Finance to facilitate the process. So
at least what has been paid back to clear the arrears and would also cater for this term?
It's going to clear the arrears. But if you look at the arrangement, usually suppliers provide and then payment is made. So that has been the arrangement between the College of Education and the suppliers. But there was an existing arrear that was preventing the continuation of the supplies, and those arrears has been cleared.
Prof, let me bring in Dr. Nyamiche quickly. Doc, so that's the clarity you have what the 67 million will do in terms of the arrears and the month is covering. Your quick take on that.
Well, as I indicated at the beginning, we are very grateful to the government for the swift response, and we think that it's a huge relief for us as principals. Once we're able to find something for our suppliers, we are good to go.
Normally, in terms of the paying your suppliers, how many months are you allowed to have an arrears for before you are required and obligated to pay up?
There is no period attached to this. As and when we get money, we pay them. And there is that understanding between us as principals and then the suppliers.
Do I get a sense then that the 6 months is the longest you've had to wait before you make a payment?
Not really. This time we've had a challenge because of the increases in the prices of food items. And so the suppliers, in one breath, want to increase the supplies that they make to us. And then we are unable to allow that because there hasn't been a review in the prices of, in the feeding fees that are paid to our students per day, per student. And so we are unable to allow them to increase the prices of their food items so far as the colleges are concerned. And so having said this, they think that once you haven't paid us what you owe us, we are unable to supply at the current market prices. And that is why they said they were no longer going to be able to supply any food items to us. Now that we have money to pay them the arrears we owe them, I'm sure that we can talk with them and we will get going.
Thank you, Doc, for your time. Mr. Kwarteng, there are other outstanding monetary issues, primarily, and if we hear the students, they say the teacher training allowances are also in arrears. They mentioned 7 months, for example. When will that also be cleared?
Okay, so Evans, if you look at the monies that has been released, in terms of the allowance, whatever has been released, half of that money goes into their feeding, while the other half is paid through the student loan transfer to them as the component that goes to them. So all the monies that has been released includes those allowances that is supposed to go to them.
Sorry, clarify. The 67 million includes teacher training allowances?
Yes, because if you look at the whole thing is an allowance, and it has to be divided into two, where half of it goes into their feeding, that goes to the colleges of education, and the remaining half is paid through the student loan transfer to the various students. The students within the colleges of education. And so the money that has been paid, the 67,942,652, also includes that component that has to go to the students.
I see that then becomes are we operating on the assumption that half of this will go to the feeding, half then goes to the allowance? That's the 400 cedi I think they receive a month. That then does that still clear up all the arrears?
Come again?
Because the breakdown you gave me suggests that the 67 was only going to deal with the feeding arrears.
No, you see, when you talk about the allowance, at the end of the day, half goes into feeding, and then the other half goes to them as more or less their pocket allowance. And so the 67 million, if you look at the entire figure of the 117 million plus, it included that of their feeding component and that component that goes to them. And so the 67 million goes to clear the two outstanding arrears, which includes the feeding component and that of their personal allowance that goes to them.
So how many months of personal teacher training allowance will this clear then?
So my understanding is that it's for the last session, which is 4 months.
They'll get 4 months of outstanding teacher training allowance from this 67 million.
That's what I can confirm. Yes.
Stay with me. The Africa Education Watch is on record to have asked government to reconsider its policy on teacher trainees because of the significant financial drain it presents. Mr. Kofi Asare heads the Africa Education Watch. Mr. Asare, so the monies have been released. Government is confident this will settle quite a significant bit of the arrears, both for feeding and for teacher training allowance. The money is there. I mean, there shouldn't be a problem, is there?
Yeah, good evening to your listeners. It is not a matter of the money being there, but it's also a matter of the money being there and being used with priority attention. Now, let me situate the disbursement or the use of education funds for teacher trainees within perspective, and let us all engage the reasons and see whether it represents the best use of the taxpayers' city, especially in an economy where we have serious liquidity issues. You know, every policy that seeks to provide equitable access to tertiary education is great. I'm not going to mince words on that. It's great, but you know, it is great because the poor will have access to an opportunity, and that will enable them access tertiary education with very limited economic barriers. But you see, it must be targeted. Okay. Now, government has a perfect targeted system, which is, if you like, the student loan scheme, where applicants go through a means testing process. Okay. And then once you qualify, you are given the student loan. That is what an equitable policy that seeks to support the needy to access tertiary education must look like. And government has one already. Now, this allowance was introduced at a time where the College of Education were post-secondary institutions. They were not colleges. They were not tertiary institutions. They were post-secondary institutions. So it wasn't possible to give them a student loan because they were post-secondary students. Okay. Now, there was a plan to convert and upgrade all of them to full tertiary institutions. And it started, I think, around 2017. So immediately the implementation of the plan started, government started running 4-year BEd basic education programs in the colleges and upgraded them to tertiary status. So the question was that if the students in the institutions have become tertiary students, okay, and you have institutions like the University of Ghana, University of Cape Coast, Winneba, all running the same BEd basic education program in them, why do you still go ahead, in spite of the existence of a student loan scheme, which government is working to improve by removing guarantors and making it even more accessible? Why do you go ahead and still make a political promise to discriminate against other students who are doing BEd basic education, but at the faculty level in the university, by saying that you will continue to pay teacher training allowances to teachers who are training in College of Education, even though the colleges are now tertiary institutions, even though they qualify to assess students? That is where the issue is.
Okay. Let me quickly give him an opportunity to quickly respond to this bigger conversation about the bedding. Is there, Mr. Kwarteng, a view at the ministry of at least reconsidering this whole approach to funding the teacher training colleges?
Okay, so if you listen to Kofi's concerns, it sounds very simplistic. But you see, there is a very fundamental problem that this training allowance seeks to cure. And that fundamental problem is the challenge in terms of the inequity, in terms of teacher distribution, especially between the North and the South, where you push teachers to probably the North and they do not take up the appointment and they feel that they cannot work in the North and certain deprived areas. Until you commit such teachers where they are duty bound to accept postings to where you would want them to go, we will continue to have situations where teachers may not accept especially appointments to certain deprived areas and certain sectors like the North and other places. And you see, that is a very fundamental problem that probably we also have to look at and address. I mean, if you recall, there was a time that we gave up, during the implementation of the double track, where government gave appointments to teachers within from the colleges from the university colleges. You realize a lot of them did not take up the appointments. But when such a situation happened, the Ministry of Education or the Ghana Education Service is unable to bound such teachers to take up the appointment and cure such a problem of the inequity in teacher distribution. The only means for the Ministry of Education or the Ghana Education Service to bound teachers in terms of course, with the ultimate aim of bridging the inequity gap in terms of the teacher distribution between the North and the South, is when they are bounded. And how do you bound them? You can only bound them if you've contributed to their education. That is the payment of certain allowances or taking an aspect of the education.
So I guess the principle is you're paying the piper, so it gives you an opportunity to call the tune. I mean, this is a conversation we need to expand on PM Express later tonight. Mr. Kwarteng, thank you for your time. Kofi Asare, thank you also. We'll expand on this challenge that is confronting the College of Education on the back of the campaign promises made in the past. You want to join us at 9 p.m. for that. News Night starts right now.